Okay. All right. Um,
Good to go.
yes, fantastic. So I'm gonna we'll talk we'll do a little bit of look into what is sacred, what is sacrament, and then we're really going to get into the plants. So we're going to talk about the plants a little bit from their history, a little bit from their chemistry, a little bit from their sacred nature, and actually look at the life plants too. So that's the main goal today, is really just to kind of get to know the plants, get to know the sacred plants, get to know the plant sacraments, and I think that should probably should keep us pretty happy. Want to encourage people to enter questions into the chat. I'm not going to read the chat until I'm kind of done with the main talk, but I think somebody there's going to be picking up questions. Hopefully, we'll get a lot of good discussion. All right, sound like a decent.
Oh wait, real quick, do you want us to interrupt you with questions in the chat, or just check in periodically?
We've got 2 hours basically, almost, right?
Yeah.
So I actually want to encourage interruptions. This is really more of about kind of like an hour talk. You know what I mean? So we'll have plenty of time for Q&A, and interruptions are great. I love interruptions. So that's a good way to go. Yeah.
Sweet.
And I'm going to share my screen, and let's look at a little presentation. Can you guys see this PowerPoint? We're going around. Is that a yes?
Yeah.
Okay. Fantastic. So we're talking about, I guess you could say, our world of sacred plants. You guys were just meeting with Aize recently. He's actually a sacred garden community facilitator. So you're getting a little sacred garden community a couple weeks here. And one of the things that we've really realized within the sacred garden community, having a lot of diverse membership, people from all over the world, people from Africa, people from Europe, people from South America, people from Asia, different, India and Asian continents. Sacred plants are really a global phenomenon. They're not something that are just like in South America or in the Americas or something like that. It's really a world of sacred plants, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And even when people talk about indigeneity and traditional plant practices, there have been conversations now. Modernity has really moved into indigenous areas. So even Maria Sabina, who is the famous indigenous mushroom curandera, who helped reintroduce the West, modern Western folks, mostly kind of white folks, the West, to the sacred mushrooms. Her own full name is Maria Sabina Magdalena Garcia, and she's was heavily influenced by the Christian religion. So, even the sort of deep representations of indigeneity are impacted by global conversation. Air moves all around the planet, water moves all around the planet, meaning moves all around the planet. The sacred plants are all over the world. So we're here to talk about those a little bit. Oh, and there's a beautiful heavenly blue morning glory in its brightness to look like this one here that's going down towards the end of the day. So we just had a little pre-prayer. A lot of times within Sacred Garden community, of which I'm the chief garden steward and one of the main facilitators, you could call us a pastor. It is a church. When we say prayers, we really like to recognize the diversity of folks that are present. So there can be diverse metaphysics and diverse faiths and beliefs and ways of looking at the world. Whenever you get two people in the same room, you're going to have that many different ways of looking at the world. That doesn't mean that there's not some common truth. At least my own personal metaphysical belief is that there is actually it's the universe we all live in together. We just see it with infinitely diverse eyes. So when we say a prayer, we often will just share a prayer of gratitude and intentions, and that's intended to be a common prayer that is okay with everyone across different faiths. And that was a little prayer I was sharing earlier. How's my signal, guys? I'm getting a little something that says my connection's not great. Can you hear me okay?
For the most part, yeah.
We can let you know when
I'll
you
just,
start cutting out.
okay, thanks, do that. I also want to give a shout out to my beautiful mom, also known as Nancy, or we tend to call her Mom. She's, and both my father, I'm really thankful that they are very aware of my sacred plant work. I started really letting them know I was interested in this ever since I had a really profound and overwhelming experience when I was 17. Some people might call it a +4 experience. If you haven't heard of that, it's kind of worth looking up. Shulgin +4. So I had a very strong +4 experience, sitting way up in the Smoky Mountains, and it was impactful enough that I started to share with my parents. And over a period of years, they began to really realize the value of sacred plants. In fact, I've had many journeys with my father, and have been able to travel to Brazil and Mexico and other areas, and journey with my dad and Terrence McKenna in Mexico, and I journeyed with my dad and Alexander and Ann Shulgin in the pyramids in Palenque. And then here's my beautiful mom. I'm just really encouraging all of us to not give up. Sometimes it can be really difficult with our ancestors. You may need to do ancestral reconciliation just in your own meditation. Sometimes you may not be able to go back to some ancestors and work things out. But if you can come to a place of peace with ancestors in this lifetime, I really want to encourage that. It's a great gift. May we learn and express respect, gratitude, compassion, peace, and happiness in our relationship to sacred plants and their traditions. Just sharing a little intention there. This dove in the middle is kind of worth calling out. Must have been 4 years ago, someone had asked if I would give a ceremony in public. They were asking if I would do a plant ceremony at the Marin Headland Center for the Arts. And I thought that seemed a little bit arrogant, maybe disrespectful, and I wanted to be respectful of the plants. I wasn't sure if that was coming from an ego place that I would be willing to do a public ceremony. I thought I could do a ceremony with Salvia divinorum, and so I was actually chewing the leaf, the fresh leaf, and sort of meditating about whether or not it would be a good idea. And this white dove came flying into the warehouse space where I live. So that to me seemed like a really good sign that probably working with sacred plants is something that the universe might want us to do. I'm not a real mystical, magical thinker. I tend to try to be scientific in my outlook, but sitting there sort of praying and asking whether or not it would be a good idea to do a plant ceremony above ground, and then having this bird come flying in and spend the night in the warehouse was a bit intense. All right. We're talking about sacred plants today. This is actually a picture from that ceremony. This is a Salvia divinorum leaves. This was from a ceremony I did a few years back up in Marin. I consider the plants we're talking about to be sacraments, indeed, even sacred and even sacraments. So we'll talk a little bit about what is meant by that. Folks who are members of the Sacred Garden Community Church here in Oakland also consider these plants to be sacred and sacraments. By that, I'll tell you what we mean in just a minute, but let's look at what is sacred. So kind of asking ourselves, what is sacred? If you go on the internet, you see a lot of people talking about sacred plants. I'm a member of Shakruna's Council for the Protection of Sacred Plants. It's easy to say sacred plants. What do we mean by sacred, right? There are a few different meanings. You can kind of find this in the dictionary. These are sort of mine, but they come out of the dictionary. So one is to be respected. In other words, something that's really special that you want to care for. That could be like your grandmother, it's like she's really sacred to me. I want to care for her. I want to keep her safe, et cetera, et cetera. It can also mean something that's held secret. And in fact, in the Old Testament, there's a nice example of the sacred also being secret. That's with the Holy of Holies. It's just an example in religious traditions of sacred things being sort of held apart and secret, special, to be protected, not to be sort of opened up to people who don't understand the value of the thing, right? Then there's also meaning consecrated. Consecrated means a community recognizes this as being sacred. So it could be like here, in a perfect example is the city of Mexico. So the Mexican people consider Mexico City to be a sacred city for them. They have a certain mythology where an eagle flew above the city and had a snake hanging down, and it landed on a cactus, and that defined the sacred place that people were to be founded. So consecrated is when a community simply states, this is sacred to us, right? Then finally, the sort of most relevant to me is something is considered to be sacred when it reflects the divine, or when it reflects absolute truth, or when it reflects the ineffable numinous mystery. That's something that's beyond words. Some people might call that God. Someone might call it a state of insight. Someone may call it non-dual state. There's a lot of different ways of thinking about an experience that we humans can have that is beyond words and seems very meaningful, deeply healing, an experience of truth, an experience of the divine. It's a big word, but something that is sacred is considered to either be reflecting that or connected to it. Make sense so far? Yeah. And then we're talking about sacrament. So that you should see kind of a similarity. A sacrament and a sacred, they're closely related. Something can be consecrated as a sacrament. That's just to state, this is a sacrament of the church. The Apostles' Creed, it will connect us to God, something like that. We consider the Vatican. I'm using the Christian metaphors. I hope I'm not offending anyone with that. I don't consider myself personally to be a Christian. I'm just using examples that I figure we can, examples in history of religions. So consecrated is something, again, a sacrament can be consecrated and called a sacrament. But to me, the more important word is something that is either considered to be connected to the divine or connecting. And this is really where, to me, the rubber hits the road specifically. A sacrament is something that is capable of connecting a human to an experience of truth or absolute truth or the divine in this lifetime. That's a sacrament, something that can connect us to divine experience or to the presence of the divine. So for Sacred Garden Community, we consider these plants, including those beautiful purple morning glories here on the picture, to be capable of connecting us to the divine. Thus, they're sacred and indeed are sacraments. Okay? And we call them sacraments for a couple of reasons. One is because we believe that they can connect us to truth about ourselves. The word truth is a big confusing word. There's people have lost a lot of faith in even the concept of truth around things like vulgar postmodernity. And I think a lot of us are being maybe gaslit by predatory capitalism. So we just generally lost a sense that there's anything that's true. Sacred Garden Community believes that there are things that are true. There are things that are true we can learn about ourselves. Those may be harms that we have caused in our lifetime that we want to hide from ourselves. Those may be harms that have been caused to us that we may need to keep away from our day-to-day consciousness just so that we can get by, right? We had a really traumatic experience. We may push that down so that we don't have to deal with it and we can still be regular people in life. But a lot of times those truths about ourselves that we don't realize, they can guide us to act in ways that we're not conscious of. So these sort of unconscious things that are held within us can really cause us a lot of alienation and separation and trauma, sort of causing new trauma in life. This is one way of looking at that metaphysics. I'm sort of using a psychological and an epistemological set of language, talking about truth within things that we're hiding from ourselves. Someone else may say that you have demons that have possessed you, or that person who was abusing me when I was little was giving me demons or something like that. So there are different ways of putting words onto the experience of truth, but the main purpose of this slide right here is to talk about experiencing ourselves in ways that we often can't because we're hiding from ourselves, or we're not able to access the spirit world, whichever way you want to look at that. Sacred plants open up our ability to experience ourselves in really deep ways. those quote unquote hallucinations that we have are really ways of expressing what we have within us, that we have an opportunity to learn through working with sacred plants. So this is one way of experiencing truth. But then there's also truth about essential being, truth about the universe, truth about, someone might say, God, someone might say a non-dual experience, becoming at one with everything, right? That doesn't even require any concept of the divine. It's a purely physical concept that includes consciousness within the physical world. So there are a lot of ways of again, putting words onto truth about essential being, and those words can be diverse. But I want to propose that through the direct experience with the sacred plants, one thing that we do learn is that there is something which is deeper, that we can really kind of connect and share language. There's infinite diversity within the journeys that we can have, but there also are deep ways that we can connect around something that's hard to put words on. It's an experience of pure being. One way to think about that is, as we're learning truths about ourselves, we can let go of things that are blocking us from being and experiencing who we truly are. As we move through those things that are blocking us from being who we truly are, by doing the careful journey work with plants, experiencing these challenging emotions that may emerge, the euphoric emotions that may emerge, whatever they may be, we can experience that during a journey with calm attention and compassion, and those things will be understood. We can move in and through them. As we move through those historical traumas that we've caused or that have been caused to us, we gain deeper understanding. We're able to move past those into a deeper place beyond words, which is deeply healing and is strongly associated with healing from addiction, healing from depression, healing from senses of anomie or meaninglessness, breaking cycles of ancestral trauma and abuse. This deep experience of exposure to something that people will call divine. They'll say it was like God. They're just words difficult to explain. Beyond ego, deeply healing. So by working, I'll share you actually sort of the core faith of Sacred Garden Community. What we'll say is we're open to the possibility that, approached with care and respect, work with sacred plants can connect us directly to the divine in this lifetime. And so that's why we call these sacraments. Making sense? Good. Any questions in the chats? We're okay? A little choppy, but mostly fun. All right, good. So I just used a lot of fuzzy woo-woo words talking about absolute truth or non-duality and all of these things. There's been a lot of effort to understand the experiences that sacred plants can allow us to have. There's even a mystical experience questionnaire developed by Walter Ponke. And it was developed as a tool to understand mystical experiences occasioned by hallucinogens. And one thing that has been found is that the mystical experiences that have been caused or occur in relationship with hallucinogens or entheogens, they're really indistinguishable from other mystical experiences reported from various other traditions. So I'm not claiming that entheogenic plants are the only way to move into this deep mystical experience. I think fasting can do that. You know, Vipassana meditation for 30 years can do that, or if you're lucky, maybe less time. There are other ways of moving into deep experiences of unity, but the entheogenic plants are really unmatched and unparalleled, in my opinion, to accelerate our ability to move into that space of oneness within this lifetime. And that is characterized by some experiences like unity, transcendence of space and time, a noetic quality. I talk a lot about ineffability and the numinous state, just as if everything is full of something deeper and more meaningful. Paradoxicality can often be associated. I've really moved strongly into a both and all and, a non-binary form of reasoning, and I think sacred plants have really helped me do that. I think that would be very helpful for us to listen to the sacred plants and how they help us to understand that two things can be true at the same time, right? It's not only one thing or another. There are many things that are all true at once. So this, for example, at paradoxicality, the experience of the absolute perfect unity and at oneness that we can all share, while at the same time recognizing the infinite diversity of each of us. So, you know, this is a paradoxical experience. We're each infinitely different in who we are. Like, I'm looking at Noah and Dylan and Anthony here on the screen. You know, each one of us is bringing just really infinite time and history into this body where we are now. We're each carrying all of these thoughts, all of these things that make us so different from one another. We're infinitely different. The differences that are infinite, but at the same time, well, we share a lot. We're humans. We have blood that we can share, you know, things like that. We all breathe oxygen. But then at an even deeper level, there's no question we're all the same thing. We're all exactly the same thing. We're all made up out of this universe. My experience is that it's also made up out of consciousness. So we're all conscious matter here together. So that kind of paradoxicality can really be associated with mystical experience as well. It can be really healing, help stop fighting so much. It's like, oh, there can be a different opinion than mine. It can also have some value into actual truth. Not that, oh, you have your opinion, I have my opinion. Your truth is your truth, my truth is my truth. There's no truth. That's not it. It's like, oh, you can actually see things completely different. I can see things completely different. Together, we can start to move towards that truth if we can let go of the idea that there's only one way of seeing the world, right? So this sort of thing can come out of mystical experience. A lot of people don't realize, and there are some other folks who can go a lot deeper into this than I can, but traditional religions actually have had entheogens associated with their founding. The Vedic religions, a lot of people may have heard of Soma. It's really worth looking into that. There are Sufi practitioners still today who report using combinations of Arundodonax, which is a DMT-containing plant, and Syrian rue, which has an MAOI, to make a Mideastern form of ayahuasca. That apparently has been practiced within the Islamic religion for millennia. They keep that fairly secret, but Mike Crowley has been doing some wonderful interviewing on that. He's got a book called Secret Drugs of Buddhism I want to recommend. Talks about traditional use in the Islamic religions. Christianity, a lot of people have probably seen some of these books by John Allegro and others around the beautiful Amanita muscaria. Actually, while we're talking about the beautiful Amanita muscaria, which is associated with European entheogen traditions, here's a beautiful Amanita muscaria here. This is really a lovely entheogen. It can be very effective if you know how to work with it. Sacraments that are still used today in religious contexts, unbroken for thousands of years, include ayahuasca, Teonanactol, Ayopo, and Sabil, and then these other two at the bottom, Kikion and Soma. Kikion is a direct sort of grandfather of LSD that's coming out of Greece. So that's really interesting that the sort of Western community is still working with that ergo fungus, the lysergamines, and then Soma, which is the Vedic sacrament, is considered to be a lot of different things. It's probably over years has been different plants. There's a lot of discussion with that. I actually went to University of Chicago and studied with Wendy Doniger, who wrote a lot about Soma. So I'm happy to chat a lot more about this and particularly the Amanita if folks are interested. Oh, and just while we're talking about sort of this connection from these really deep ancient traditions to sort of Western society, there's actually in Act 2, Scene 2 of As You Like It by Shakespeare, there's a beautiful poem about the toad. We'll get to that. I think we'll see that in a second. So a lot of people might want to ask what happened. There's sort of a misunderstanding that you can hear occasionally where you might hear, white people don't never worked with entheogenic plants, but it's people of color, South America, that work with entheogenic plants. And so, we need to sort of like there are these different groups that haven't, but actually it's really interesting. It turns out in many ways, we might say that the Europeans were some of the first who were separated from their historical sacred plant use. There's a real strong history of sacred plant use in Europe as well as the Americas and Africa and elsewhere. But starting really about 1500 years ago, when the Roman Empire was picking up on Christianity, the plant witches, the plant healers, particularly working with women's health, which involves the ergo fungus and nightshades, became recognized as being demonic. I think it was probably considered to be competing with the what called itself a church, but was really more of a state control model. The Holy Roman Catholic Church and then the Spanish Catholic Church pushed the sacred plants out of the Western society, and it started coming back again in the really not until the 1800s when we were rediscovering mescaline through peyote and hashish, and then particularly in the 1900s and 1950s when we really started getting back to these plants. Here's that Shakespeare quote I was mentioning. So this is I swear that character William Shakespeare was associated with some people who knew about plants. He had some really interesting references to witches' brews that were sort of calling out some things that are actually entheogenic. And here he writes about the toad. Like the toad, though ugly and venomous, wears yet a precious jewel in its head. And right here on the toad's head is where the glands are that hold the 5-MeO-DMT, the venom with the 5-MeO-DMT that's deeply entheogenic. Wears yet a precious jewel in his head, and finds tongues in trees, books in running brooks, sermons in stones, and good in everything. And that's kind of a rich little sentence there, making me get a feeling that there was a little bit of understanding that even in Europe, back in Shakespeare's time, that the venomous bufo toads would open up an experience where you can listen to trees, you can hear the teaching of a running brook, you can receive the sermon of a stone, right? So I thought that was kind of a neat thing. We're just trying to understand a little bit around the sort of where are we coming from with sacred plants. There are folks in this group from all kinds of diverse backgrounds. So there are a lot of ways of looking at coming into back into sacred plants. And I just want to express a lot of gratitude right now for the traditions in the Andean highlands and deep in the jungle of Sierra Mazateca and Amazonia that managed to keep access to these sacraments and kept those practices going in many cases by hiding from the dominating religions, and have been so gracious to share with us, including to allow me to bring plants back to the United States and to permit me to bring practices back. Just want to express a lot of gratitude to the wisdom traditions that have kept these sacraments in our awareness. If you guys haven't gotten a sense, I'm really trying to sort of talk a lot about where we're coming from, what is my tradition, what is my lineage, what do I think about these plants, and I want to encourage each of you to do the same for yourself. You are a member of the next generation, a new generation, your generation, right? It's a really lovely time, I think, for this generation. There are super tough things happening on political levels, environmental levels, social levels. There's a lot of suffering on the planet. I want to recognize that. Indigenous peoples whose land we're sitting on right now are suffering. At the same time, there are new opportunities. There are opportunities for learning. When I was 19, there were very few elders. I really had to seek to find Wendy Doniger at University of Chicago. I had to go all the way down into remote areas of Mexico with my dad to be able to spend time with Sasha and Ann Shulgin and learn from them about entheogenic compounds. My elders, the elders who are above me, Terrence and Sasha and Ralph Metzner and Richard Evans Schultes and Kat Harrison. From the West, they had almost no one to reach out to. So they really were trying to recreate a sacred lineage from whole cloth. They found some folks like Maria Sabina and others who were really overwhelmed by the need for healing that was brought to them. Now in your generation, there are many more. Many of us have parents who have experienced entheogens, so we don't have to be underground hiding with fake names and all that. This is a long way of saying that we're creating our own traditions, and we all create our own traditions all the time, and that's our job, and we need to do this in a careful way. I want to move to you. We want to do this in a respectful way. We don't want to co-opt or steal. We want to move with respect. We want to ask for permission, and we want to give back to the traditions that have helped us, because they're bringing us all the power and knowledge that without we wouldn't have this, and I wouldn't be able to even experience the divine in this lifetime. I don't believe, if it weren't for the folks in the traditions that I'm from. Let's see. I think I saw a few chats coming in. Let's see if any. Okay, mostly just comments. Good. All right, I'm gonna count on you to shout out when there's questions. I'm not gonna keep going back to the chats.
Yeah, we got it.
Okay, good. All right, so that's the sort of big hellos, context setting, and all of that. Now I think we can actually start to have a little bit of real fun. Let's look at the real plants. I've had a comparative religion background, undergraduate from UC Santa Cruz in religious studies and psychology, and then I went to University of Chicago for religious studies. So it was a comparative religious background. I'm very interested in talking to a lot of teachers, and there's a common theme that will come up around what are called master plants or teacher. They can be called teacher plants, master plants, bold plants, bold speakers. They're distinguished from the subtle speakers. So there are other plants like sage or borage or what else? Well, that's good enough. Sage, things like that are subtle speakers. They do have messages. They kind of communicate, but they're not bold speakers. So you can sort of have a little bit of an experience with a number of plants. But when we're talking about the master plants, we're talking about bold speakers. And this is kind of a subtle area because, I'll say this and people will say this. They're like, why do you call the bold speaking master plants sacraments? Isn't every plant a sacrament, like a potato or a pear or a cherry? Because they keep us alive, and by existing, we're able to move in a direction to where we can become at one with the universe, right? So in a sense, everything is a sacrament. Anything that exists that can help us move into a place of deeper understanding. But the bold speakers are recognized, like Teonanacatl is the Nahuatl Aztec word for mushroom. That's called the body of God, right? So these bold speaking master plants are recognized as sacraments. Hold on just a second, guys. I think we're getting a little background noise. Can you hear that? Is that background noise distracting anyone? Can you hear that?
It's not distracting, but it's a little. It comes in and out.
Okay, if it's not too distracting, then I think we're all right. Thanks. So in a sense, yes, all things are sacraments, but the master plants are given a preferred space. They're called body of God. They're called sacraments. They're called the sacred plants. They're the master plants because they're bold speakers. They help us learn. They help us listen to the quiet. We can't always hear those subtle speaking plants, or we may be too distracted. So the bold speaking plants, they speak loudly, and so that we can hear them. There are a few categories of master plants. And in fact, actually, a lot of people will put tobacco in its own category. They'll just call it, they'll call tobacco the grandfather, and it'll be its own plant in a place of honor. Tobacco is a plant that is really requested to approach with respect. Karen Darrow, who I worked with, basically said, tobacco teaches respect. If you don't approach her with the deepest care and respect, she will seduce and dominate you, right? So tobacco is its own category. Although tobacco also actually is a nightshade, it fits in the brightest nightshade family. It's similar in many ways to Datura, believe it or not. A lot of people don't realize that. But we'll allow tobacco to be in its own category just in honor of the power of that plant. The other categories are deepest forest. Those are the tryptamine-bearing plants. A lot of people don't realize psilocybin from psilocybin mushrooms, that's 4-PO-DMT, 4-phosphoroxy-DMT. Ayahuasca contains NN-DMT. The bufo toad contains 5-MeO-DMT. There are other trees and plants that will contain both DMT or 5-MeO-DMT. These are the sacred plants of the deepest forest. They do tend to grow more in forest areas like Amazonia. They're twining, they're vining, they're spiraling. They connect us into the inner world and up to the great world. Okay, I'm going to turn off the share for a minute so that we can look at a few plants.
Wait,
Here's
Bob,
the beautiful. Yep.
Real quick, we have a quick question about where mugwort might play into this.
Mugwort was what I was trying to think of. So I was trying to think of a few of the others. And mugwort would be considered a subtle speaking plant. It's a healing plant. It is a communicating plant. It's really lovely. It might be used as an admixture in some with some entheogenic potions, but in itself, it's not considered to be a master plant or an entheogenic plant. I'm not saying it's not sacred, but it's not in that master bold speaking category. That good? Yeah, yeah. And blue lotus is actually a really nice question to be asking. So we'll talk about blue lotus, marijuana, canna, khat, kava, and a lot of these under the infinite varieties of perfection. They're not commonly actually considered marijuana, blue lotus, canna, khat, kava, and others to be in the master plant category. Salvia divinorum also is one of those. They're often not included, I think, in many ways because they're not as widely known. And they're a little bit more diverse, but we'll talk about those. And actually, I don't have my slide deck open, but we'll go back to that. So just to really focus for a minute on the major master plants, the tryptamine bearing plants, this is a beautiful, beautiful Psychotria alba variety UDV from Unal do Vegetal, the ayahuasca church. So this, some people would call this chacruna. This is a DMT containing plant. This is a very traditional plant used in DMT containing potions, specifically ayahuasca. So this is the beautiful chacruna plant. Beautiful chacruna. Aho, aho, beautiful chacruna. Carrying a lot of power. Chacruna, and then this is also very interesting by itself. You could eat all the chacruna that you could find. You could smoke a lot of leaves. You could make big extracts and eat up all the extracts, and you really wouldn't have much of an experience because we carry around with us a whole set of functions that allow us to turn down the volume. So the bold speaking plants, they have a lot to say, but we have to deal with the day-to-day life. We have to go run around and shoot animals with our bows and arrows so that we can survive, or drive in the car to work and all this kind of stuff. So that we actually have this system called the monoamine oxidase system that really turns down the volume of all of the chemical signals that are around us in the world, or you could say all of the plant spirits, all the spirits of the plants are sort of muted because we can't just hear all of them all the time and have conversations with each other and stuff like that, right? That's at least a way of thinking about it. The monoamine oxidase inhibition system, it jumps on the DMT that this plant carries and it takes it apart. It oxidizes it. And so we don't have to listen to that plant. But when you take this beautiful ayahuasca vine here, they actually look surprisingly similar to the leaves. They just look like regular leaves. Beautiful ayahuasca vine. The ayahuasca vine contains a monoamine oxidase inhibition. So it has what they call beta carbolines, and they turn off or they sort of turn down our volume system. So how do I want to put that right? They turn off the system in our body that turns down the volume, right? When you have the ayahuasca in your body, you can hear the other plants and they become much more present. So by combining the ayahuasca vine, which is called the vine of the soul and is really a privileged vine, with the chacruna leaf, and actually with a number of other different plants. There are other plants that contain DMT, and there are other plants that ayahuasca will also turn up. But by combining the ayahuasca with DMT, then you have a full experience, because then your ears are ready to listen to the other plant. A lot of people kind of thought it was big magic. They're like, how in the world would the shaman ever figure out that you have to mix these two plants? Because by themselves, just this one by itself, you don't really get a really strong experience. You might actually get a little bit of an experience because the chemistry that's already there, or the spirit that's already there, becomes more, you can hear it, but it's subtle. But if you eat the other plant, then that voice really comes through, right? And we can say that the plants told them that they had something to say, and I will agree with that. However, I think that we can also understand it in a way that's a little bit less obfuscating or mystical. I'm very interested in reality is actually magic, and we don't have to sort of make up fuzzy things and act like it's real to feel good about it. They're actually real things, and the plants really do communicate with us. So the reason why the ayahuasca vine is considered to be the center of ayahuasca and not actually the chacruna leaf. This by itself is actually considered ayahuasca, but you'll have it and it won't be very strong. But here's the thing. If you have the ayahuasca and then you go into the jungle and you just taste the leaves and you just be present with the different things, then they will tell you. So the plants will tell you that they have something to say when you have eaten the ayahuasca, right? And so someone sometime probably ate this ayahuasca and then suddenly they really started hearing a lot. And then you'll try a lot of plants, and there are many, many plants that are mixed in with this vine. And by mixing a lot of different plants with this vine, all that different language becomes available, right? So it's really it's not like that there was necessarily that there was some character standing there saying, hey, you need to come and listen to me. But that spirit can be present, and there can be that plants do carry a spirit. But everything is true. So the fact of the molecule in this plant that turns down the monoamine oxidase inhibition system and lets us hear the DMT is true, as also true that this plant here is a deeply helpful spirit that teaches us to listen. And when I'm working with this plant, I can hear what the other plants have to tell me. And when I walk in the forest, I can listen and hear them. So both of those ways of telling that narrative, I believe, are true, if that makes sense. Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful ayahuasca. Thank you, beautiful ayahuasca, for all the gifts you bring. Let's see, a couple of other fun things we can look at in the sacred plants of the deep forest. We're just looking at the ayahuasca vine. Here is passion flower. And actually, I should run out and grab a little passion flower. Maybe if we have a little time for questions, I'll run out and grab one out of the garden. They're really beautiful flowers. But this is a passion flower plant. And this also has monoamine oxidase inhibitors like the ayahuasca vine, right? So a lot of people don't realize there are other things you could call Gayahuasca, or some people call it ayahuasca borealis or huasca, but there actually are different plants that you can mix together, like you can mix together the passion flower, and you can take that and mix it in with this. Let me pull one of these out here. So this is called Delosperma cooperi. It's an ice plant. And actually, some of this you can find growing in Half Moon Bay, in front of some restaurants and things. There's a lot of this, and I have some growing here at the garden too. This is a different plant. It's actually of African origin. It's called Clip VG or Clip in Africa. It's also called Delosperma cooperi by Westerners. This has DMT and 5-MeO DMT. So by mixing these two, you also can get a different combination where you have the DMT and the monoamine oxidase inhibitors, right? So that'll also make an ayahuasca experience.
Hey, Bob.
Yep.
We have a question. We have two questions actually about passion flowers. Some of them may contain cyanide. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Particularly the cerulean type. Yeah. Although actually the amount of the cyanogenic glucosides that you can get from Passiflora cerulean, if you boil that for very long, that'll boil off. So you can actually still work with that particular plant. Mm-hmm. And it's also not likely to be of the sort of concentration that would actually cause any substantial trouble. But the short answer is you're right. Yeah, and that's kind of the least desirable of the passion flower types. Others are better edulous than others. Yeah, that's a good comment.
Cool. And then the second thing is, what is an ice plant?
Yeah, so there are a lot of different plants that are called ice plants, and there are these really big ice plants that grow near all the beaches. I see Aria mentioning, and they are in the family. So those are ice plants, these kind of big ones you can see growing all along the beach at like Santa Cruz or wherever. This particular type of ice plant that has DMT is a slightly different type. Shoot, where'd I put it? Oh, I see where I put it. I don't need to put it in the front of the screen again. I put it in the dirt. You can sort of recognize it because it has tiny little crystally looking things on it, like little dewdrops or something. It's kind of shiny. And it's a particular type of ice plant. Not all of the ice plants are likely to have DMT. Some of them will and some of them won't. You can actually order this one online. It's really easy to grow, and it will have 5-MeO DMT as well as NN-DMT. So that's kind of special. There are a few others in the Delosperma genus that have DMT. And it's also really interesting because one of the things people are finding, there used to be a lot of fights. One person would say, oh, Delosperma cooperi has 5-MeO DMT. And the other person would say, no, you're wrong. It's not. Yeah, that's the name of it. That's the Latin name, Delosperma cooperi. And so people would get in these big fights. And it turns out we've learned it's just been 10 years we've learned this. People were fighting over Trichocereus pruvianus cactus. It has mescaline, it doesn't have mescaline. People, over the ice plant and all these different things. It's like cannabis. If you happen to have hemp, you're not going to get high. If you happen to have sour diesel, it's got a lot of cannabinoids that are really active, right? Similarly, you can actually have a Delosperma cooperi with not much in it, or you can have a Delosperma cooperi with a lot of DMT. It's like I have brothers, the Stanley family. Some of us are really good at math. Some of us can't do any math, right? So that's like that with the plants as well. And so like those big succulents that grow near the beach that are everywhere right along the beach, it's been said that they don't have DMT, but it may well be that somebody just tested a couple of those and they looked at the hemp variety. You get me? Right? So there's still a lot more to learn around this. And that's pretty amazing that it's like 2020 and really we just don't know a lot about a lot of these plants. And there are things that are known that Westerners don't know, but there are also some things that just nobody knows, like the ice plant was not a traditional sacred plant. It's been more recently discovered, right? So that kind of stuff is happening. That's why a lot of times people call those analogs, the more recently discovered plants, rather than calling them sacred plants, they'll call them sacred plant analogs, right? Because they haven't been consecrated by a community like the ayahuasca plants have been. You get it? But for me, I will consider them to be sacred, and Sacred Garden community will consecrate those plants if they carry the spirit of the teacher, right? Okay. So we just been talking a little bit about the sacred plants of the deepest forest. Teonanacatl is another. I could show that mushroom, but it's decriminalized in Oakland, but still federally illegal. So I guess we'll leave that out today. So here we are looking at the sacred plants of the deepest forest. A number of tribes are very actively working, for example, with the ayahuasca vine, Shipibo, Mazan, Zaparo, Guahibo, many throughout South America, basically from Ecuador on down. And then further north in Mexico, for example, Teonanacatl is the sacred plant of the deepest forest, or really the fungus. A lot of people don't realize, oh, I should have brought some of this in. This grass here, this is called Phalaris. Phalaris grass will contain NM-DMT and 5-MeO-DMT, sometimes in pretty high potency. I have a type called Big Medicine and another type called Turkey Red. They're quite potent. They look exactly like regular garden grass, just regular yard grass. Strong DMT containers. Oh, here's another DMT container.
Hey, Bob.
Mimosa tree. Yep.
Are you meaning to share your screen right now?
Oh, I'm trying to share my screen. Hold on. I moved back to screen sharing. Let's get it up. All right. So real quick, this is that chacruna we were looking at. Here's a mimosa. This has tons of DMT in the roots. This is actually what a lot of people will use to extract DMT for changa or for DMT. There's passion flower. All of those are DMT containing. Then the grass over here, that's DMT containing. This grass down here, that's DMT containing. Yep. Mimosa trees and acacia trees will often have DMT, but that's also an area where people will get really confused. Sometimes you just see anything that's a mimosa tree, you think it's got DMT. That's not always the case. Those pink flowered mimosas that grow around Berkeley, generally nobody's been able to find anything in those. But these other types of mimosa from South America that you can grow up here in Berkeley do. Oh, this is Esfand or Syrian rue. That's another source. The Syrian rue seeds are quite good for the monoamine oxidase inhibitors. All right. Then we can move to the sacred plants of the biggest sky, Oh, Anthony, it's so sweet, your text. I just had a friend coming over here today showing off his t-shirt that he dyed with the extract of the mimosa root. And it did make a fairly decent looking reddish, tannish purple kind of dye. So you can actually dye your t-shirts with mimosa roots. So you can order the mimosa root online and dye your t-shirts with it. Occasionally the mimosa root has been seized at the border where they're claiming people are going to be making DMT from it. If you're making DMT in a decriminalized city, you might be safer. If you're making DMT under the auspices of a sincere church, then you're actually free to do that in the United States. And yes, welcome to beautiful Wachuma, sacred plants of the biggest sky. The mescaline containing plants. Peyote is one that most people know, also called hikuri. Sacred Garden Community does not work with peyote because the Native American Church has asked us not to. I've had a number of conversations with Native American Church, and they just are concerned about the vulnerable status of peyote, and then also there's some current historical conditions that make it really difficult. Native Americans themselves aren't allowed to grow the plant. Most of the Native Americans are not. So they're really asking that white people stay away from peyote. I know people have different opinions on that, and I'm not saying that someone's being unethical if they're growing peyote. But generally I'm doing what the Native American Church just asked me to do, and I'm encouraging us right now not to use peyote outside of an approved Native American environment. It's just a challenged plant right now. But the beautiful Wachuma, some people also call this San Pedro. San Pedro is quite a bit more of a colonial name. It's more like saying Kleenex in a sense. You know, it's a one way that people refer to one of the mescaline containing cactus that you're seeing here. More generally though, these are called Wachuma. They can have a lot of different looks actually. You can see here a cristata. That's quite nice. Here's a long needled Peruvianus. This Trichocereus pachinoi is what a lot of people will call San Pedro, although generally that's not really the preferred usage from the native use. It would be called Wachuma most commonly. There are a lot of different, people don't realize this, there are hundreds of mescaline-containing cactus types, just a few listed here.
Bob, quick question.
Yep.
So I saw this cactus, the size like bigger than this house, on a run through Berkeley, and it has flowers that look exactly like these ones. Do you like? Would this type of thing be a Wachuma, and how much mescaline would be in something of that size?
Yeah, so from that picture, it's hard for me to tell. There are some similar looking types like Cereus instead of Trichocereus is a different genus. Also Scopuli, there are different genuses, right, that look pretty similar. You can tell by looking at the shape of the ribs a lot of the time. They tend to be more rounded and less pokey. I'd have to look directly. I'd have to look at it. And one of the reasons why I'm mentioning that, can you guys see me on the screen? Okay, can I leave the screen share on and you can still see me? Okay.
Yeah.
Here's another type of cactus. You see how different that looks, but this is also a Trichocereus, and it has peyote. But see, it looks really different, doesn't it? Yeah. So this is Trichocereus, I think, grandiflora. By the way, this has a little canna growing, a little canna. You can look up canna. We'll talk about that later. That's more in the sort of marijuana and other category people were asking about. Of course, here's the classic San Pedro or Wachuma. People recognize beautiful Wachuma. Beautiful Wachuma. Another little bit of interesting information. I'm going to take a couple side journeys here. A lot of people will talk about the indigenous people, and they'll say the indigenous people tell us this, or the indigenous people tell us that. Having gone into some fairly remote areas in Brazil, Mexico, Ecuador, Peru, there's not an indigenous people. There are many different indigenous peoples with different ways of thinking and feeling and different ways of modeling the world. So if I'm speaking generally about curanderos and curanderas, I just want everyone to recognize that I may speak generally, but there's diversity. Just as there's diversity within our communities, there's diversity within indigenous communities. In fact, the metaphysics, the way of describing the relationship to a plant can be quite different, even from one Mazateca community. You go over the valley into the next, over the mountain into the next valley, and the other Sierra Mazateca community will have quite different ways of describing the plants. So, that's just something I wanted to bring up. Now having done that, I'm going to talk about a general concept, which is very interesting. Often, indigenous peoples call the sacred plant by how it looks. In the West, we look at all these things, the shape of the flower and all this, and we get really sharp distinctions between, one species and another species by, how it looks and all these different things, whether or not it can breed and stuff like that. However, in the many of the indigenous communities, if it has the same spirit within it, then they'll call it the same thing. So this can be Wachuma with this look. This other one here can be Wachuma, like this look. This one over here can be Wachuma. You see that one? So all of those are Wachuma. They're all the same person. They're all the same teacher. Similarly, different plants may be called Toei. We'll look at that in a minute. So we're really talking, the most common name is Wachuma. There also can be called Simora and other names for these cactuses. They're really mostly along the Andean highlands is where they come from. And they have evidence of having been used for over 4,000 years without any break. So, you know, if we think that the Western religions, Islam, Christianity, you know, even Buddhism is really only 2,500 or so years old. There are uninterrupted sacred traditions that are over 4,000 years old in the Andean highlands existing today, working with these cactus. So if anybody tries to tell you that, you know, traditional religions don't work with these cactuses, you can tell them that that's not really true.
We have a quick question from Sheer, which is,
Yep.
how do you determine the spirit of a Wachuma?
So there are a lot of different ways of talking about that. And one of the things that I like to try to help us recognize is that the word is not the thing, right? So there are a lot of different ways to use language to talk about the spirit of Wachuma. There's the big sky spirit that Wachuma brings. And really to do a good job describing that, I should probably sing it, which is to say, you know, thank you, beautiful grandfather, for bringing the big sky into my heart, for connecting me to the warmth of the sun and connecting me to the depth of the earth. Thank you for bringing that spirit to me, oh grandfather. That's the spirit of Wachuma. That's the spirit that you can find in all of these plants, right? Another way of talking about the spirit of Wachuma is to say it contains phenethylamines. It contains mescaline, right? So we could say the spirit of Wachuma that the curanderos communicate with is the psychoactive mescaline molecule, right? That's the voice that is shared. And personally, I find no problem with considering the shape of a molecule to be a voice as the same as the shape of syllables coming out of my mouth, right? So there are different ways that we communicate. Wachuma communicates its spirit in part through the mescaline molecule. It also communicates its spirit through its beauty, through its flowers, through the grand presence that it brings in every way. But what makes it a bold speaker, I think most people would agree, is the mescaline that it contains and the other phenethylamines it may contain. And that has sort of been tested. For example, when someone brought psilocybin back to Maria Sabina, she said, now you know the spirit that I know. So in other words, the spirit is coming through that little pill that they brought to Maria Sabina in the psilocybin, as well as through the mushroom itself. Making sense? Yeah. Really, really like the questions. Want to encourage those questions. So we've talked about grandfather tobacco. We've talked about the sacred plants of the deepest forest, of the biggest sky. Now we're to the sacred plants of the brightest night. Those are the nightshades. Let's see if I can find something to show us here. Oh, here's a beautiful nightshade that I just brought in. This is called well, one way we can call this is Toei. It can also be called Borrachero. It's also Iachroma cyanium, Iachroma. This is a beautiful nightshade that is used in Colombia, Sibundoy Valley, and others for what they call difficult cases. It's a very strong plant. There's also on the picture in the background here, you can see a beautiful American belladonna. This actually grows all over Berkeley. So if you look around in the ditches and things, you'll probably find it. You can recognize it because it has these little black seeds, or little black berries, little black berries. Let's see if I can get a good picture of the berries. Come on, focus. Well, you get the idea. So it has these little black berries. Generally, I wouldn't recommend doing what I'm going to do right now, but I've gotten to know this particular plant very well. A single one of these berries is a microdose. I'm just going to enjoy that. Thank you. Beautiful plant, lovely berries. That's a nightshade. They contain acetylcholines. The plant I just showed you, that's called the New World belladonna or black nightshade. Datura is also a type of nightshade. Here's the Datura seed pod, all full of seeds. You can recognize the Datura by the spiny seed pod and beautiful spiral flowers. Don't eat these unless you really know them quite well. These have a lot of physiological activity beyond the psychoactive. They are used in Western pharmacology for, let's see, gastrointestinal things, nausea. If you have too much salivation, this one will be used. Parkinson's disease, all kinds of things. And if you eat too much of the Datura, it can kill you. It's actually, it's sort of overblown in terms of its toxicity. You know, you have to try pretty hard to eat enough to kill you. But if I ate all these seeds, that would kill me. That would kill me. Before it killed me, I would be running around all confused, bumping into things, thinking spirits were talking to me, and being really in a dissociative, dreamlike state. But in smaller doses with someone who really knows how to work with these plants, it will help, particularly with what they call difficult cases, because it will make the experience and the teaching of whatever sacred plant or whatever you're working with seem much more real. So with the nightshades in particular, it becomes pretty much impossible to tell what's really happening and what's not really happening. It just can seem very real. So spirits will come visit. You may sit and talk with your long lost relative for a couple of hours, and in the morning you really think that they were there. You know, that sort of thing can happen. They're often used as admixtures to ayahuasca because they tend to cause the experience to be a little bit more impactful for people who are working with them. Actually, a little story I'll try to tell real quickly. A guy named Eduardo Luna, who runs a ayahuasca center down in Peru called Nihei Rao. He had been doing the ayahuasca center for a lot of years, had a lot of experience working with a lot of shamans, curanderos, whatever you want to call them. And he went to his teacher and he said, hey, you know, I think I'm ready to start working with nightshades. I've been offering ayahuasca for years. I've been offering Wachuma now for a few years. And so the guy says, okay, why don't you develop strength and the discipline that's needed to work with this plant? He said, this is the last plant that you should work with. These are the strongest plants of the garden. You need great strength and discipline before you work with this plant. So he said, okay, what do I do? He said, carry this pile of rocks from one side of the yard to the other. So he took all day, he carried the rocks. The next day he comes back and he says, what do I do now? And he says, carry the rocks back to the other side of the yard. 3 months he carried rocks back and forth in this guy's curandero's yard to develop the strength and discipline to work with these nightshades. At the end of 3 months, the teacher came to him and said, I just don't think you're ready. So, you know, that's the message that I like to share. If you're kind of thinking about, oh, hey, I saw a little Datura growing down there near the, you know, home style breakfast restaurant in Berkeley, think twice before you eat those seeds. You know, grow the plant, get to know the plant, grow it. It's beautiful. I'm not saying don't work with it. I'm not a gatekeeper for you guys, but I just want to share the messages I've heard. I think this is something that you want to be a little bit more careful with, but they're certainly in the main pantheon of sacred plants. And tobacco is really the king of them. In fact, there's even a nicotinic receptor, acetylcholine receptor. So tobacco is right in there. And then last but not least, we've got the infinite varieties of perfection. So we were talking a lot about DMT and the tryptamine bearing plants. I could have also included morning glories. We were looking a little bit at the morning glory. It's a really interesting plant. It's closer to LSD. They're called lysergamides or lysergenes or ergenes, LSA, that is contained within morning glories. Sort of halfway between a phenethylamine like mescaline from the cactus and like tryptamine. So it contains a little bit of both shapes of the DMT and the mescaline. It's really interesting that way. This is what the seeds look like on the pod of morning glories. This is happy time. If you see this off morning glories, that's good. You want to see that because that allows you to harvest this. These seeds are really lovely if you want to take just sort of a little handful, like this many, like that, just a few. You can chew those and let them dissolve in your mouth before bed, and many people report much more vivid dreams. In fact, some people will report even overwhelmingly vivid dreams. It's like, wow, it's like I slept all night, but I felt like I wasn't even sleeping because I was just having intense dreams. Then if you eat more like 200 of these, you can let them dissolve just in your mouth, and that will help with nausea. These can also have a little bit of cyanogenic glucosides in them. So a lot of people recommend doing a cold water extraction. It's safe if you want to eat them. You can eat them. So you can either let them dissolve completely in your mouth by slowly chewing like 40 and then another 40 and then another 40 over a period of about an hour and a half. That's the way I was taught. Or you can make a cold water extraction. You can look that up on the internet. But this can actually be quite a lovely and delicate journey. A lot of people don't realize. I'm going to grab my salvia. I think I have one really near here, but it's just right here. I'll be right back. Here's a beautiful Salvia divinorum. This has salvinorin A. A lot of people get to know Salvia divinorum in a rather rude way by buying the concentrated extract from a head shop or a convenience store and then putting it in a pipe and smoking it. I just want to take a minute just to say thank you to beautiful Salvia divinorum. That's not the recommended way of getting to know the plant. In fact, a teacher that I met, basically what she says to me is, a lot of people will report, this is what she says to me, I'll back up for a minute. A lot of people will report the first time they ever try to work with Salvia divinorum, it's really weird. It's like you go through all kinds of bizarre spatial twisting and fall and become part of the table or whatever, all these different things happen, but it's not very pleasant. So a lot of people will kind of report like dysphoria. So I'm talking to a teacher about that, this wonderful Spanish woman, and named Ana Elda. You should look her up online. She does a lot of great work in the space. But she then connected me to a curandera way out in the jungle. I was helping her make a documentary, and basically the curandera said this: imagine you're at a party, imagine you're at a gathering, and you see someone very beautiful. But you don't know them, and they might actually be very wise, and they might actually carry a lot of dignity, and they might carry a lot of knowledge, and they might carry a lot of power, but what you see is something that's attractive that you want to have for yourself. So if you go up to that person and you treat that person like something attractive that you want to have for yourself, but it's carrying all of the wisdom and knowledge and dignity and all these things, you just grab that person by the arm and you suddenly start trying to kiss them, what do you think is going to happen? Right? So if you just go up to a beautiful, proud, wise teacher and start trying to put your tongue in their mouth, this is what they're going to do. Oh, you want to get to know me? Okay. Ah! Right? It's like, you can get to know me. I'll let you know who I am. And who I am is, if you approach me in a disrespectful way, I'm going to be a little scary. Right? So the recommended way of working with Salvia divinorum is first to grow the plant, just to get familiar with the presence of the plant, become friends with the plant. Then just take a single leaf, then take 2 leaves, and just get to taste the plant, get to know the plant, breathe on the plant so that the plant will get to know you. You're establishing a relationship with the plant. Then chew 2 leaves, 4 leaves, 6 leaves, 8 leaves, like that. You actually get this plant stimulates neurogenesis, so you'll grow a further sensitivity to it. It used to be I would need to eat 16 of these leaves and take drops of tincture to have a journey, to have a fresh plant journey. Now, if I simply chew 1 leaf, I tend to need to go lay down because I've become very sensitive, and now I know the plant. And she is so full of bliss and so brings so much euphoria. So anyway, that's a little story about how sacred plants can help teach care and respect. We looked at a little canna a little while ago. Oh, here's the nice kava leaf I just happen to have here in the house. Nice big kava leaf. Got a kava plant outside. A great infinite variety of perfection, not in the main master plant category, is the Amanita muscaria. This has a really unusual compound called muscimol. A lot of people don't really, if you try to take like 15 grams of this and put it all in a glass and chug it down, it's going to make you nauseous. You can do it that way. That's one way that you'll see on the internet people say to do it. But what I found is that just chewing a tiny little bit, like this much, it's like a little piece, and letting that dissolve in your mouth, maybe while you're talking with a friend, maybe having a little cannabis or whatever you want to be doing, just sort of slowly taking this and chewing it a little bit. In fact, I'm going to take a little bit right now, just this little bit. It has a lovely taste, like umami, sort of like nice soy rice or something. And again, that mouth stomach is a really good way to get to know these plants. If you're growing the plants, you can graze them. You can get to know them differently. That's like that story I was mentioning with the ayahuasca. If you're living in the forest, or if you're living inside a garden with a garden all around you, then you can graze the plants. You can just taste them over time, and that'll absorb through your mouth, and actually can be a really lovely journey. So there are a lot of different sacred plants other than the main master plants. The main master plants are the plants that are bringing the deep forest into our lives. That's the tryptamine bearing plants, DMT, psilocybin mushrooms, 5-MeO-DMT, bufo toad is in that one. Then there are the big sky plants, peyote, wachuma, mescaline, and other phenethylamines. And we looked at the beautiful nightshades, which we talked about. And then finally, this can go on forever, infinite varieties of perfection. So there's plenty more we can talk about there. Beautiful Salvia divinorum. And I'm just going to kind of wrap up the slide part of the talk with just another little prayer. I really want to offer respect and gratitude again to the elders who have, from the West, rediscovered and reconnected us to the Western plants, and particularly to the elders of various traditional religions and indigenous societies who have been able to continue surviving, have been able to keep your practices alive even through colonialism, and have kept the sacred plant wisdom alive, and have shared that with us in your honor and gratitude for your teachings. Que aprendamos paz, respeto, felicidad y compasión desde nuestra relación para plantar sacramentos y sus tradiciones. May we learn and remember peace, respect, happiness, and compassion from and in our relationship to sacred plants and their traditions. Thank you, thank you, thank you. That's a little talk.
Thank you, Bob. So we have some questions, some lingering questions in the chat, and then there's also a few students who prepared questions in advance, and then I'm sure that there's going to be a bunch more questions from there. But just real quick, there's a question about resins, and what do you think about frankincense, myrrh, and other resins?
Yeah, and I think I would make it less about resins and more about frankincense, myrrh, copal, fennel, cloves, all the spices and incenses. Let's see, what else am I thinking of? Even dill, nutmeg, sassafras. So these are all incenses and spices. Many of them will have some psychoactive qualities. And actually, I got to say, I'm very familiar with the spices. So nutmeg, sassafras, fennel, dill, parsley, and others, they'll have phenethylamines in them, or actually what some people call prephenethylamines or essential amphetamines, but they can be active even by themselves. People have heard of nutmeg, but actually those other spices can too. and their extracts can be active. And then if you just do a little bit, they'll become very active. They'll become psychedelic, like MDMA. So sassafras by itself actually does have a little bit of activity. It makes your feet lighter, your eyes brighter. But then if you do a little aminate the core phenethylamine structure, you'll get a MDMA, or actually MDA, and then you do some more and make it MDMA, but it becomes really strong. Actually, I think there may be something about frankincense and myrrh that I've read or heard about, but I'm not remembering, where there might actually be something psychoactive about them, but I don't know frankincense and myrrh particularly. Oliver, do you know, is there some psychoactive compound or something in frankincense or myrrh? Do you know?
I don't know specifically, no.
Yeah, okay. One thing that I will also say is that copal, atoche, which is another type of pine, resinous pine, which has a nice smell. And then I will actually, even though I don't know about them as being psychoactive, I will use like frankincense with a little charcoal burner in ceremonies, because they just bring a feeling of grounding, and also they can be useful for kind of cleansing and clearing a space. So they are different incenses and scents are often used in ceremonies more to put us in a healing way so that we can hear the teachings. Yeah. Other questions?
Well, I actually just realized that 5 people signed up to prepare questions for this week. So I want to give those folks an opportunity to ask their questions.
Okay.
So if any of you all are ready to share, just chime in.
So this is something we've touched on a bit. First of all, I just want to say thank you. That was incredible. But you talked a lot about how your relationship with the plant is important in the experience you'll have with it. Something we've touched on a bit is kind of the difference between synthetic versus natural or plant-based psychedelics. And I was wondering if there's any basis to the idea that a lot of people have about, I like magic mushrooms better than LSD, for instance, because I think it connects me to nature more. Is that something inherently based in the substance, or where do you think the basis for that comes from mostly?
Yeah, that's a super rich conversation. Like, we could easily have a whole 2 hours, just, it's a good one. And the first thing I want to propose is, for me, and we each have to find our own metaphysics and do our own interpretation, and I want to encourage that. I do believe at the same time that there can be we can have common knowledge. And for me, working with sacred plants teaches me that there are many ways, that there are in fact infinite ways. That's what sacred plants teach me, that there can be more than one way for something to happen, right? And the reason why I'm saying that is because the first +4 experience I had that I'm still integrating to this day, including the co-founding Sacred Garden community, which is what was with LSD, right? So I'm going to offer nothing but the deepest gratitude to a single molecule, right, that was created in a lab, okay? And I deeply believe that single molecule, even by itself, is a perfect sacrament, right? So MDMA, single molecule, can be really lovely. 5-MeO, DM. Look up online. If you look up Alexander Shulgin +4, basically +1 means I'm not sure if I feel anything, maybe. +2 means I definitely feel something, but I could be at a museum and get by. It's like a museum dose, right? +3 means I'm seeing patterns or something. I need to be sitting down. I probably couldn't talk to my mom or be in a museum. That's +3. Like, I'm definitely under the I'm having hallucinations. It's really powerful. And then +4 means it's as if my ego dissolved, it's as if I died. It's as if everything disappeared and nothing is present except for everything. I'm at one with the universe, God, ineffable, numinous. It's beyond words. Mystical experience. That's +4. And for me, when someone moves into that +4 space, then everything becomes present. all of the trees, all of the smells, all of the chemistry, all of history, all of the past and future it's all always here. Everything is always present. Everything always exists. So there's nothing less about a single molecule. Okay, so that's one thing. But then the next thing is there's also so much more about full spectrum experience. So both are true. This is what I mean by both and, okay? Right. And so, yes, I believe that the terpenes in cannabis add all kinds of other color and flavor that can be guiding and helpful. And yes, I believe the baeocystine and norbaeocystine and norpsilocin that comes along with mushrooms and other things may also make the experience richer and fuller. And you see what I mean? So it's both. I believe both are true. I think that the full spectrum, look, I love growing the plants. I love the plants. I love the garden. I work in the garden, and I love the molecules. We can do that. We can have both. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Great question. Thanks.
I had a question about the concept of the divine that you talked about earlier. If you experience the divine after like one trip, when you come back to it, does it take a different form each time, or are you sort of experiencing the same personal truth or inherent truth every single time you experience the divine? I'm sort of just trying to wrap my head around the concept.
Oh no, it's a lovely question again. And you guys might know Bronner's soap. Anybody knows Bronner's soap? I was hanging out with David Bronner last night. I'm kind of excited because Bronner soap's pretty awesome, and I think that's pretty fun. And we were having this conversation, Sam. So we were having this conversation, and the way that there's this common concept. It's in transpersonal psychology a lot. Trying to sort of move past the perennial philosophy that there's like this divine unity and it's all defined in the same way, and the Greeks defined it first or something, right? That's like we figured out what God is, and that's sort of this perennial philosophy. But there's this sort of more positive postmodern ideology, which is kind of like this: there is truth, there is a divine place of unity. It's like the ocean. Okay, this is the idea. It's like the ocean. But then depending on where I go to the ocean, I could describe it as saying, well, at the ocean, there are rocks and big waves and a fjord and lots of ice, if I'm in Norway, let's say, right? Or I could be down in Jamaica and I could say, well, I know what the ocean is like. It's warm and there are seagulls and, right? So it's like the ocean can be different depending on who you are looking in when you go to it. So someone can have a deep experience of the divine. And let's say it's my dad from East Tennessee, and he'll come back and he'll say, I knew it. God is real and Jesus is real. And Jesus spoke to me, right? And said these things. And then it's like, well, what was it really like when Jesus spoke with you? And it's like, well, it was just like the presence of love. And it's like, well, was it a guy with a robe or something? Well, maybe not. You know what I mean? It's like there can be different. Here's the thing. We have to put language on that experience, and we have to make, that's integration. We're trying to make sense of it, right? And when we do that, it's me, it's Bob, it's this body. I only have so much language. I only have so much insight. So for me, I'll talk about when time stops, eternity is now. That's an experience. It's like, oh, all time and space, everything becomes present. There is no other. This is another one for me. There is no other, like that, like this is me coming back from that divine space, right? The last thing that goes away is love. The first thing that comes back is love. It feels, there are these different ways. And I will say for me, it can be fairly similar going in from time to time. And also we can have conversations and we can understand each other even from different language, which is really interesting. So, I may say, oh, well, for me, it's all about time, stopping time. And the other person's like, well, for me, it's all about love and being surrounded with universal love. But then I'm like, oh, yeah, I had that feeling about, I think I know that feeling you're talking about. And the other person can say, oh, but now that you mentioned it, I did kind of get that time stuff, right? So it's like, we're back here in this world, in these bodies, trying to compare notes about an ineffable experience that we can actually remember. So this is a really interesting place. And our language is becoming more subtle because we live in this positive postmodern time where I can hear how everyone else describes that experience, right? And I can listen to it from a place of respect. And then together we actually, I believe, can do a better job bringing the language of the ineffable into this world in our practice, in our bodies, in our language, and bringing heaven onto earth is really what that's all about. And heaven can take infinite forms. You get me? It's a lovely question.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, good.
Hi,
Thanks.
I had a question on master plants. Are new master plants still being like discovered today? And if or when that happens, who or what labels them as a master plant?
Yeah, that's a lovely question too. The short answer is I will assert yes, master plants are still being discovered. But most commonly now, and I don't know how I feel about this, honestly. Often master plants are called analogs, the newly discovered ones, because it's like, yeah, no, this is not the chacruna, this is not the ayahuasca vine, this is phalaris grass, okay? I'm some curandero in South America. I don't want to call that a master plant, or you know what I mean? Or even like I'm some white guy and I'm like, no, I went to Peru and I found out about, I found out about the master plants. This is just some grass that grows in the back of barns everywhere. We just figured out it has DMT in it, right? Is it a master plant or not? I think it's a master plant because it's carrying that character. It's carrying that spirit. It has the chacruna in it. You see what I'm saying? So for me, it is a master plant. And that's why I went to that big story. The indigenous people, they'll call the different things the same thing. It's like, it can have all kinds of shapes. It's still Wachuma, right? So but Nate, that's a real open question, whether or not, a lot of people will say, no, it's not a master plant. It's an analog. Okay, whatever.
Thank you.
Yeah. Really good questions. Other questions?
Yeah, I got one. This one's a bit technical, so bear with me real quick. It's about the guide. So my question is, Fatimam's guide dispels the myth that psychedelic usage directly correlates with heightened degrees of spiritual and religious development. But it does go on to mention that, quote unquote, skillful and respectful use with careful attention to intention, set, and setting may help to foster the spiritual path. End quote. Keeping in mind that elsewhere in the guide, it kind of mentions that one should be careful not to hope or intend for a specific outcome for their recreational experience. Would you say that having an intention prior to the trip is more essential for a spiritual experience as opposed to a recreational experience?
Aho, Aiden. Lovely, lovely question. Thank you. Are you more on that or good? You good? Yeah.
That's good.
Perfect. Thanks. Love that question. And I also see Dylan kind of referencing Francois. There's also a question about Sacred Garden Community. I want to encourage people to check out sacredgarden.life if you want to learn a little bit more about Sacred Garden Community. It's still kind of a young website, so it's a little messy. The member onboarding is a little weird, but you can get connected to Sacred Garden Community that way. The reason why I'm mentioning it is Sacred Garden Community is really grateful to Francois. We have a number of Francois trained facilitators in our community. We also do our own facilitation training like Francois does. And this is going into your point, Aiden, which is to say, even the core tenet of faith that we all share within Sacred Garden Community, it actually says we're open to the possibility that ... engaged with care and respect, right? So we have to engage our relationship to the universe in a respectful and caring way with, I'll say something like discipline or care, right? If we expect a teacher to respond and to offer teaching, we have to go to that teaching from a place of care and respect. We have to be prepared, okay? So Sacred Garden Community actually talks about navigation, preparation, initiation, which means getting started first in a careful way before really even going into the psychedelic practice. So all of those things, navigation, preparation, and initiation all occur before you just start eating the mushroom. You get me? And so it's really funny that you mentioned in the last, we have these little 11 a.m. Sunday kind of workshops that we do. And so the last one we talked about intention setting, right? Yeah. And and it's nice that we were just referencing a little bit about integration, because all of these concepts that Francois is sharing, that I'm sharing, they're intended to help us actually come to the teachers in a good way, so that we're prepared to hear the messages that they have to teach us, and so that we can move into the divine space and bring that into this world, right? Everybody froze.
You're back.
Okay. Where were we? Where did I cut off?
Bringing into this world.
Okay, good. So in our core faith, we assert that we have to have that care. We have to move into the relationship in a good way. And if you're not, then it's just like any other relationship. It can be disintegrating. If I go to, and okay, here's another one of the teachers from the curanderas. This beautiful older curandera in Sierra Mazateca. I was asking her, how do I do a good job facilitating and avoid having trauma for the person I'm working with and for myself, right? And this is what she said, Aiden. If you give Nino Santo to someone who is not prepared to receive its teachings, or who is not respectful of it, that will make you sick, Bob. The person who so it's very important that we move into this relationship with care and respect. If you give mushroom to someone who's not accepting it with respect and preparation, the person who gives the mushroom will be sick. That's the teaching. And I believe that's actually true. Because that other person is going to have a bad experience, a challenging experience. And if you have any ethical heart at all, that's going to hurt you, right? If I help someone become harmed, that makes me sick, right? And so I kind of forgot your question. Did I answer your question?
For the most part, I mean, it was about mostly intentions for spiritual versus recreational. And
Yeah.
you kind of touched on that with your intention has to be for care. So
Yeah.
I touched on it.
Well, and then there's the last thing about intentions, which we talk about setting and letting go. So it's very helpful to set an intention, because that's guiding you into a good place. So you're approaching the teaching in a good way. You're like ready to learn something. You're asking for help. You're humble. You know what I mean? You're coming with a healing, humble intention, which is preparing your body to receive some teaching, right? But often what will happen is, these entheogens, they bring a lot more information than I imagine, right? It's a lot more than I'm walking around in my day-to-day life. I don't know what it's like, oh, I think I want a nice girlfriend and I want a good job. And okay, I have some intentions, right? But then the mushroom, if you hold on to those intentions, you go through the whole journey. Like, what about my girlfriend? What about my girlfriend? Right? The mushroom's like, look, I don't know anything about your girlfriend, but what I have to teach you is a way of relating to the world so that you will be loved and you will love everyone that you meet. And it doesn't matter if you have a girlfriend, because you'll be surrounded by love, and that will come. And you need to let go of that intention, because there's more that you need to learn. It's not about a better job for you. It's about loving what you do, or whatever, you know what I mean? Right. So often it's like you really have to let go of the intention in order for the teaching to happen, but having the intention will help move you into that place where you're ready to learn. Got it? And I love this conversation too, because if there's anything that the entheogens can teach, it's about relationship and the subtlety of relationship. It's a relationship to the mushroom. It's a relationship to I'm growing my relationship to myself, right? And that's what is important. It's not like a magic pill that you just take and suddenly you see you're all in the middle of God. You have to be seeking and going in that direction. Yep. So, okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bob. That was truly amazing.
Wait, Donovan, did you get a chance to ask your question?
I just had a follow-up question, which was relating to what you were talking about earlier with the divine. I'm just curious, like, I see you talk about like the divine versus like a divine experience or divine insight as like different things. What do you mean those as like different experiences, or are those similar in the way you describe them?
That's a really interesting one. And I like that
Real-
question. Thanks, Don. Yeah.
Sorry,
What's
sorry
that?
to interrupt real quick though, but we are at time. So I don't want to keep anybody here, because this is technically the end of class. But Bob, if you have time to keep hanging out, that would be so appreciated.
I do have a guest here, so I'll want to cut off pretty quick, but we'll at least like to answer that last question. And I want to thank so much everyone who spent the time here. I want to thank you for your care and for your intentions to learn, and just for your presence, really learning about these sacred plants and seeking healing for all of us. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yep. May your goals be achieved. May the education you're receiving help bring gifts to the rest of us. Thank you for all the work you're doing. Donovan, to try to answer that question, this is a space of what I'll call mystery. If you might actually check out hermeneutics, this concept of hermeneutics. I'll type it in if you guys. And so hermeneutics has to do with being a sort of like a mortal who has a perspective, being a subject in a world of objects, right? So like I'm sitting here and I see I see you guys. There are people out there, and like I'm talking to you right now. So since I'm talking to you, I can't be you, right? I'm not you. I'm outside of you. I don't know you. Like I don't know you from within. Even if you're my best friend and we've been hanging out for years and everything else, I still don't know you, right? You're out there and I'm in here. This is hermeneutics. It's like how do I know the thing unless I'm really it? Okay. And so the concept of the divine, I'm just doing this right now out loud. I'm trying to figure it out myself. So I'm not coming with a pre-packaged answer to this one, which is my own sense is the being is divine, that existence is divine. And all of this is an awesome mystery, and it's a gift, and it's a divine gift. But I'm separate from it because I'm in this body, and all of you guys are out there. Everything's out there, and so I don't know you, right? And I don't know the divine. I just know trying to have a relationship to you, which is trying to have a relationship to the divine. And when I say you, I mean thou, like Martin Buber, I, thou, right? And so, and this is relating in many ways to hard problems of consciousness. I appreciate that. So the concept is, if I have consciousness as a self, then I'm separate from everything else. I'm a subject, right? So if I can move into an experience where I get out of the way, it's no longer my consciousness, it's just consciousness, then what can happen is I can learn, oh my gosh, everything is freaking made up out of consciousness. Now, this is me putting words that I'm making up stuff, but that's the experience. It's like, oh, everything is conscious. Everything is aware. Everything is full of love. Everything is known. Everything is known. Every single thing, every little pebble, every little rock, everything. Because on a really strong psychedelic experience, combined with having done a lot of mindfulness meditation and other things, it's like, I just became all of that. That was the experience. It's just like everything went away, and suddenly all time and space and all things became available. There's no difference between the experience and the thing and the divine. It's all one. And that's just the way it is. And everything is divine. And this is divine right now. And the more that we can wash ourselves in that experience, the more we can actually recognize that this is divine, that we are the same. We're infinitely diverse. You're completely different from me, and we're completely the same thing, right? That's just an experience of divine that breaks down all those categories. I don't know if that was making any sense, but I was trying.
Thank you.
All right. Well, that's the last of the.
Guys, just take a little bit of time and wrap up.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. Go for it.
I just want to say again, thanks to the universe for this beautiful class. Thanks, Dylan, Noah, and all of you folks. I'm trying to remember the other person who I met, but thank all of you guys for this organizing. May the time you're spending together bring each of you closer to a real experience of truth within whatever that is for you. May it bring you deep transparency and wholeness within yourself, just happiness. I just want to say thanks for the time. I also want to say thanks for the color blue and purple and orange that I can see on the screen here. It's really miraculous that we can have it. And if we can hear this bell that I'm going to ring right now, we're all here now and we're doing everything we need to be doing. Oh, let's get a better ring. Thank you, thank you, thank you.